Hi, and welcome to Seminar 9 about the Ark and the Third Temple. When I was at Mount of Olives the last time, Jews had gathered to bury a beloved man, a father of 7 children. He had been a victim of a terrorist attack and had been killed along with his pregnant wife and 2 others in Hebron by a Palestinian. They were all shot to death. Yitzhak Ames was very eager to see a third Jewish temple built. In fact, he went on the Temple Mount every Yom Teruah with this thought. When he was killed, he was currently working on an encyclopedia of the ceremonies connected to the holiest of holies. After being killed because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, some people were left wondering, why isn't God blessing these few men wanting and actively promoting the building of the third temple? Why wasn't he protected so he could finish his work? Yitzhak Ames was not the only one lamenting over Israel not rebuilding the third temple. It's a movement among both Christians and Jewish groups wanting to take away this mosque and rebuild a temple here, where the second Jewish temple once stood.
When the new temple might be built, or the plans of it, or
When will the temple be rebuilt? We don't know. Why are you asking this? Go be a good Jew.
The situation is so tense that when the Jews opened the Western Wall tunnel alongside the mosque, it was enough to start an intifada, and many people were killed. The Palestinian Authority also claimed that the Western Wall belongs to them. Palestinian protesters gathered at the site after rumors that an extreme Israeli group would damage the site, which the Israeli government denied. Israeli police stormed the Temple Mount complex to disperse Palestinian protesters who were throwing stones at them. These items here are authentic items built by craftsmen to be placed in the third temple. This candlestick, that you can see on the way to the Western Wall, has also been made to stand in the new temple. Of course, there is one problem with all of these plans. Israel has political power over the Temple Mount after taking it after the Six-Day War, but they do not have religious power over it. In addition, the many in the world claim they have no political right to it either, leaving them with almost no allies in this subject. Many believe that God is allowing the Ark to be found so it can be placed in a third temple where a kingdom will rise from Israel. Any attempt to tear down the mosque or take over the Temple Mount will most likely turn into a war that will affect the entire world. Here you can see Jews walking with guards on the Temple Mount, unable to worship there, ending their tour outside the gate while singing and dreaming of the area they have lost. And here you can see Jews praying underground in front of the temple area. So this is an extremely important topic to understand for both Christians and Jews and even Muslims. So let's look at the history behind this area. This mountain called Moriah, but also regarded as a mountain in the city of Zion, might now become the catalyst for a Third World War. The first time we hear of it is when Abraham came to this mountain and was just about to sacrifice his son, when God suddenly told him that he would choose another to die in his son's place. The prophecy of the substitute went as follows. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Yahuwah Yireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Later Abraham paid tithe to the priest and king who ruled here. But the population changed, and by the time Israel entered this land, it was controlled by the Jebusites. David conquered this city, believed to be on the slope below the mount here. The Ark of the Covenant was first brought into the city of David. Then, breaking the requirements of the Torah, David is faced with a plague from God, a plague killing the inhabitants of the city. Lamenting over the punishment, David sees an angel standing on the hilltop before his house with a drawn sword to judge the entire city. David is told that to spare the city he must build an altar and make a sacrifice. When a sacrifice was made on the Mount Moriah, the angel of the Lord removed the death penalty the citizens had been given. The place David was told to sacrifice was a field at that time, and it was chosen to be the place to build God's temple, where the ark was to rest. The Bible frequently tells us that he had chosen this particular mountain to be the place he would reign from and judge from and give pardon from. David's son, King Solomon, built the first temple here. This temple area was magnificent, built with stones from the mountain itself. As you can see here, a giant cave opens up below the mountain where stones most likely have been taken from. Stones were also taken from the mountain outside. Jerusalem's weakest side was on the north. Not surprisingly, one part of the mountain was cut away from the rest, as you can see here. The big chunk of the mountain is removed, making the highest peak of the Mount Moriah separated from the rest of the mount. So this corner-shaped piece of the mountain is left outside the city and is known today as Golgotha. The Ark of the Covenant was placed into the most holy place of Solomon's temple, and the temple itself having the entrance on the east. So this temple was grand, and Israel was a free nation with God reigning from amongst them. But Israel started to leave the laws of God's kingdom and obey the laws of the heathen kingdoms instead. They decorated the temple with pagan symbols and made the place unholy. After sending the people several warning messages over a long time, saying how he will protect them if they are faithful to the laws of his kingship, but that he will give them consequences if they rebel. And so the ark was taken out of the temple and placed in an unknown location. Then the Bible tells us that King Joshua tried to restore God's place as king in Israel, placing the ark back into the temple and teaching the people to uphold his law. This is the last time we hear about the ark being moved. 22 years after Joshua's death, the temple was destroyed. New kings had come and continued rebelling against God and his law. And finally God decided to allow the temple to be destroyed by the Babylonians, but the ark was missing. Everything taken to Babylon was listed down, but the ark is not on the list, nor was the 7-branched candlestick, nor the altar of incense, or the table of shewbread. The main items from the holy and the most holy were not taken to Babylon. God had said his place of reign would be on this mountain forever. So was the ark still on or in the mount? And if so, where? According to the Bible, it had to still be there, but not overly. Now from this time, when the ark was taken from Israel and Judah, they lost their freedom. These two facts are closely related, and this is why the ark was taken from them and why it wasn't returned. You see, Israel from that time would be ruled by Babylon, then by Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then the Roman Empire. God, as the creator of the universe, would not have his throne in a city subdued a pagan power. It would be placing God below them. God's place of reign below Nebuchadnezzar, below the Romans. So this is why God's place of reign was removed at this time and not given back to Judah. The people then returned from captivity in Babylon and started rebuilding the second temple in the same spot the first temple stood. God blesses and encourages their work, but they do not get the ark back because they are now under Medo-Persian rule. And God would not rule under Medo-Persia, nor was he taking over the area. The ark would not stand there as long as the land was under another ruler. It would have been a mockery towards God, like when the Philistines placed God's ark before Dagon. So the ark wasn't missing, it was taken away by God. They had placed themselves under heathen rule by obeying heathen laws. So the second temple was without God's throne, his place of reign, but was not without God's care. Before they returned from Babylon to rebuild the temple, they are told through the prophet Daniel that they were on probation. He said, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make a reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Prophetically, a day represents a human year, as seen in these scriptures. They were allowed to return and rebuild the temple, but were given a time of probation. If they succeed, God would restore their independence with him as king. If they failed, they were to be rejected. So God gave them the land back, but only halfly, because they were still under a pagan kingdom. The act of not releasing them from pagan rule shows only partly trust, aka under probation. So if God's throne had remained among them, it would have appeared as if the God of Israel had been subdued a heathen power as well as the citizens. It's a bit like today. A crime is committed, leads into captivity, taken out on probation. If obedient, you get your freedom restored. If you fail, you have to go back to captivity. So the second temple was built, and subsequently King Herod the Great made this temple even bigger. Herod removed another large clump out of the mountain and made a large plateau on the Temple Mount. There he renewed the old and built a big fortress on the northern part of the temple plateau, overlooking the temple area. He also had a palace standing on the mountain opposite Moriah at the western hill. King Herod is the same king that felt threatened by word of a Jewish king to be born in Bethlehem, so he killed all the babies in that city, leading Mary and Joseph to escape to Egypt. He was a spiritually corrupted human being and died around the time 4 BC. Yeshua visits the temple. He lets people know he is the king and the Messiah. He teaches people in the temple area. However, his place, him claiming to be God's son whom God hath elected king, is rejected and ridiculed. The leaders of the people capture him at night and take him to the Roman counselor to be judged. Here he is asked if he is king of the Jews, where Yeshua then confirms it. And then Pilate is addressing the Jews. And he said unto the Jews, Behold your king! But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Thus rejecting the Lord as king and choosing a pagan. So Yeshua is crucified, where Pilate writes on a board above the cross, Yeshua, King of the Jews, where the leaders say, Then said the chief priest of the Jews to Pilate, Write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. However, Pilate refused to change the wording. A short time before Yeshua was killed, he said in front of witnesses, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathered her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Here Yeshua stated that the temple would once again be destroyed, and the reason for it being destroyed is the rejection of him. Christ was taken to the part of Mount Moriah that had been separated from the rest, and crucified. But was the king taken the same place the ark had been hid? The probation would end, leaving them vulnerable to the hand of whoever wanted to destroy them after rebelling against the Roman emperor. And here is a coin from the rebellion found in the ancient ruins. The Romans encompassed the city and later destroyed it along with the temple and everything. Here are excavated the remains of a rich citizen from the time Jerusalem was destroyed. The house has been burned and an arm of a human found in the remains. They thought the temple would never be destroyed, that God wouldn't abandon them. And here, one of those ended their life in the most tragic manner. With the temple taken from them, and with it the possibility to make peace with God through the atoning Sabbath called Yom Kippur, Israel no longer had a way to redeem themselves according to the law. Jews were denied access to the city completely, and the temple in honor of the Roman supreme god Jupiter was placed where the Jewish temple once stood. God did, however, not interfere like he did when the ark was placed with the god Dagon. Whether a Jew believed they really had rejected the king of Israel or not, they could not deny that God had taken from them the Temple Mount, the place God said he would reign from. Notice how, when the first temple was destroyed, no pagan Babylonian temple was placed there. It was just left in ruins until the second was built. That time the Jews were giving a prophecy that they would return and rebuild the temple after 70 years. But this time there was no such prophecy given to the people living then, no promise. God was seemingly silent to the Jews' plea. 70 years went by this time, but the Temple Mount was not given back into their hands. God was about to allow any conqueror to build there, except the Jews. The pagan temple with Apollo had statues of Hadrian and Antonius Pius in front. Jews did not have free passage to the mount. Then the Byzantine period started, where the temple of Apollo was left in ruins. Now it was the Christians who had spiritual control, but neither they followed God's reign. Although the pagan temple was gone, God still didn't return the mount to the Jews. Now from the hands of the pagan Romans, then the Byzantine Christians, another conqueror took the city and the mount in 638 AD. They too controlled the Jews' right to the Temple Mount. In the early Arab period, a mosque was built on the place where the Jewish and later pagan temple stood. Even though ruler after ruler managed to gain control over the mount, the Jews were left helpless to battle against them. God was still not hearing their prayers to gain back their Temple Mount, the symbol of their redemption through the ceremonial laws and the place God would reign from. Clearly, God was not choosing to reign in the state of Israel at this time. The next power to fight over this spot were the Roman Christians. In 1099, they conquered Jerusalem after a 5-week siege. They are known as the Crusaders, and this was called the Crusader period. And God also allowed this to happen, but He didn't allow the Jews to conquer. The mosque was turned into a church. Then in 1187, Saladin entered the city and took control over the mount, where it once again was turned into a Muslim religious house. Later, when the Ottoman Empire took over the city, they rebuilt the walls around the city and strengthened the city as a place for pilgrim visits. And it's their walls that surrounds the old city of Jerusalem today. The place then fell to different hands. Between the years 1917 and 1948, Jerusalem was under British mandate, a Protestant nation. However, they allowed the Muslim mosque to remain standing as the longest standing building ever erected on the mount. Yes, no other building had been standing so long there, not Solomon's temple, not the Second Temple. In fact, the Muslim mosque stood there longer than the 2 first Jewish temples combined. In the old city today, all different types of people are centered: Muslims, Jews, different Christians, Protestants, and Catholic and Armenian, to mention a few. It's almost like all people once entering the city throughout time has a trademark or a monument and a people remaining. In 1948, the State of Israel was declared. Over a period of time, groups of Jews immigrated to Israel, in addition to those Jews that had always lived there. But Jerusalem was still in the hands of the Arabs. During the Six-Day War, Israel liberated East Jerusalem from the Jordanian rule on June 6, 1967. The Jews finally had power in Jerusalem after being humiliated at this very place for hundreds of generations. From this time, a movement started among both Christians and Jews, thinking God was now giving the land back to them. But the political situation was not in their favor. They were left outside the Temple Mount, knowing any attempt to tear down the mosque could result in the death of the State of Israel, leading to a war with both the Arab world and even the United Nations. A piece of the wall closest to the mountain, called the Western Wall, became the place of lamentation over the temple, so close but still not there. Many prayers and many tears have been cried here, and from it being a place of lamentation over the loss of the mount, today many Jews have given up the idea of a third temple and have claimed the wall itself to be God's new dwelling place, that it has divine presence, that God is still not punishing them. Many think of Jerusalem now as a Jewish city, however, it is not completely. It hasn't been for 2,000 years. Today it's controlled by the Israeli government, but their hands are still tied. Not by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Crusaders, or the Ottomans, but by the eyes of the world, who is paying close attention and defending the Mount for the Muslims. It's almost as if God allowed the Jews to return almost all the way, so close, but still not making the Mount available to them. Some Jews think God wants them to tear down the mosque and build a new temple. And that is what many of them are preparing to do. Many Jews think that a restoring of the temple will give them back the atoning ceremonies and therefore God's forgiveness. However, such an act would be another rejection of Yeshua. So in regards to a third temple, this is important to understand. Yeshua said the temple was destroyed because they didn't accept him. Thus, still not accepting him leaves them still under condemnation. As we see, 2,000 years have passed and God has allowed pagan Christians and Muslims on the side doing unbiblical things there, but he keeps preventing the Jews from building there. Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one cometh to the Father but by me. Notice who he says this to. That's right. He said it to the Jews, meaning there is no way to get to the Father but by him. God will not accept a temple service without Christ in it. The apostle said also to the Jews, there is no other names whereby we will be saved. This is the message for Jews today. There is no other way. God will keep the Temple Mount away, leaving them without atonement until they accept Christ. What Christ said still counts. The temple was destroyed after rejecting him and choosing a pagan king over him, and that they shall no more see him before they say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Christians encouraging a third temple is fighting against God and God's rule. Instituting Levite priests is a rejection of Christ's priesthood.
Today is really a historical event for the Jewish people. It is the beginning of the work of the third temple, construction for the third temple. Here in Mitzvah Yeriko, we are building a field school for Kohanim and Levites in order to teach them the work that they have to do in Yerushalayim when the temple will be rebuilt.
Most scripture references used to strengthen the idea that God is giving Israel the Temple Mount and causing the immigration were written before the second temple was built. That's right, God spoke of a new temple and the people of Israel returning, and it happened. 3 migration occurred after Israel's captivity, and the temple was rebuilt. This happened after the prophets had prophesied about it, and now some of these references are used for a third temple and migration now. But Yeshua's statement still stands. Most Jews today have still not met his requirements. You see, in the time the Jews were under Persian rule, the ones who wanted to rebuild Jerusalem went back. The rest stayed. Today the Jewish count is in its millions worldwide. There are more Jews living in America than in Israel. In addition, the lost tribes of Israel have turned into multitudes after the prophecy found in the Bible. People are discussing immigration, if you are a Jew by blood or by faith, which DNA haplogroup belongs to the Jews and which doesn't. But the fact is, for God to fulfill such a prophecy today as he did in the time of the Second Temple, there wouldn't be room enough in Israel for them all. From 1995 till 2010, the Jewish population in Israel has grown by 1 million. Most of the Jews are secular. Tel Aviv is counted as one of the most prominent gay cities in the world. God's blessing indicated that Israel would have peace from their enemies. But Israel today is under constant threat. Just as Israel was once harassed by the Philistines, they are now at constant battle with enemies in the same areas, like the shooting I just mentioned, constant terrorist attacks. The world is quick to judge them and put pressure on their actions. In the Bible, water shortage is also a sign of God keeping his blessings away. In Israel, there is a drought. as seen by the water level in the Dead Sea and in the Sea of Galilee and Jordan River, or this note in a Jerusalem hotel room. After the Jews had rejected Yeshua, he said to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." Earlier, Yeshua had let his apostles know that the world meant all who oppose his law. Yeshua would never have an earthly rule over the unwilling or over the pagan. And this is just what many Jews and Christians are waiting to happen. The Messiah coming to rule as a king from Judah and over ungodly and unwilling nations, forcing them to obey him. But Yeshua, or for those who do not believe in him, I'll refer to the Jewish God, has not made any attempt to rule over the unjust in any other way than judging and sentencing them. The ark was removed when the people no longer wanted him as their king. It was hidden away from them, according to the prophet Jeremiah, never to give him back to them. So the earth is still God's jurisdiction, but he is judging them from the temple in heaven after giving the earth a probation. And then he will recreate and start a kingdom with only those who want him as their king. Right now, Yeshua is winning the inhabitants of his kingdom through the gospel, through personal acceptance of him and his kingdom. As Yeshua said, the kingdom starts within you. He will not rule as a king physically, but rule through his spirit that dwell in the individual, until the time comes when he can gather his own and start the kingdom of peace. As he said, "If you love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it seeth him not, neither knoweth him." So the others will be judged and eventually removed from the kingdom, but not be a part of the kingdom. Paul did write about a secret, a tree symbolizing God's kingdom, built upon the law and the prophets, that those who turned against the king who had been broken off the tree will get a second chance, that many Jews would be put back onto the tree. But all the different books of the Bible must be understood together. One verse does not contradict another. Those put back on the tree are those Jews meeting Yeshua's demand for them to acknowledge him as king, and it will be those that understand they cannot obtain salvation through the ceremonial laws, but that Yeshua is the only way. It's my personal belief, looking at Christ's own statements, that the Temple Mount will be kept away from the Jews forever, as it has been for nearly 2,000 years. For God, nothing is impossible, and the fact that he has done this for so long is a testimony to them that they lack something for regaining his favor. I think you will be amazed to see when Jewish groups try to take over the mount, God stops them, even punishing them over and over again. Right now, the Israeli government themselves are stopping some Jews from tearing down the mosque and rebuilding a temple. There will always be someone there to stop them. You see, Jews want to put up the sanctuary system again, something Muslim, pagan, and Protestant Christians never did. And the sanctuary would be a mockery towards Christ, taking the focus away from the sanctuary in heaven and his work there, and deceiving the people on earth to rely on man's deeds. The book of Revelation describes a restored planet where the New Jerusalem will come from the sky, being a city from God placed on earth. It's written that in it there is no temple, but the throne of Yeshua and his presence will be there. In the New Jerusalem instituted by God, there will be no new temple. Sin has been dealt with, man and God united. There is no need of separation. There is no need of the sanctuary to represent God's throne for man. Therefore, only the throne and the people of the kingdom are left in the new city. The earthly ark outside the sanctuary could very well be the foundation of where Yeshua would have his throne. The evidence that he is the creator as well as the one who bought the freedom of the inhabitants of earth. The evidence the kingdom belongs to him might be on earth forever. As the Lord said, "For the Lord hath chosen Zion, he has desired it for his habitation. This is my rest forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it." So Ron Wyatt said there was a wall behind the Ark throne emitting the colors of the rainbow the last time he was there, and that the staves had been removed. In the Bible, the colors of the rainbow was above the Lord's throne. The Ark would no longer be moved into an earthly temple. It was there to stay until God lifts up the mountain. We will only know for sure as we follow the events. And as the nation continue arguing about the Temple Mounts, as Jews stand at the Wailing Wall mourning the loss of the temple site, could the part of Moriah that was cut off, the part God had chosen forever? Just as Christ was rejected like this piece of the mountain, he was the cornerstone they rejected, like the mountain also was cut off the rest of the mountain and even shaped as a cornerstone, as a witness to what really happened here.